Crafty Meraki friends, Aditi here, and today I am going to be showing you how to create this interactive card without using any specialty dies. For the card today, I am going to be playing with the Birthday Star Mini Slimline die using two of these stitched frames for my card base as well as my card front. Apart from that, here I have the be your own kind of cupcake that will help me create my focal element for this fun interactive birthday card today. When using this stamp set for a previous project, I had stamped extra cupcakes as well as die cut some of these cupcakes without the stamped image. And so I always like to do this because this comes handy when I have to put together a quick card. So I will be using two of these cupcakes here, and I like to just die cut the cupcakes using the coordinated die without the stamped image simply because this helps create a little depth. So in that case then it's not necessary to use a lot of foam adhesive to uproot and create dimension. Just those extra die cut layers really work well, making this sturdy and creating that depth. So that is a handy tip when using your stamps with coordinated dies and when you want to create a little depth and dimension. Now for the card base, I am going to be using a piece of black cardstock, and for the card front, I will use a white cardstock. Now the black cardstock that I have here was prepped for a slimline card which measures 8.5 inches by 3.5 inches when folded. And so I'm just going to use that with this particular die. So I'm using the bigger of the two frames, and I want to create a landscape card which is top folding. And since I want to use that frame die to create a shaped card, by that I mean, creating those rounded corners and getting that stitched frame, I need to use a ready card base. So I'm going to just place that die on that black cardstock, but along the spine or the score line, I am going to make sure that my die overhangs a bit. So the cut edge of the die is actually going to be outside of my cardstock, and what that ensures is the card will not be cut at that score line, and I will have a shaped card ready that just opens the way I'd like. So you could use this vertically, you could also create a vertical card, you could create a horizontal card like I am, and it works both ways. It's an absolutely fun card to create, and I think it's a really great way to stretch our frame dies, our nested dies, our stitch frame dies to create shaped card bases. So I am going to run both these pieces through my die cut machine and be back. So that is our white card front, and let me show you the card base, just removing the die, and that way we have our shaped black card front opening at the top, and like I already told you, it could open sideways and create a portrait card. So my white card front will just lay over the black card base, and I think all of this looks great. We can begin creating our design for the card front. Now last week I had created a rainbow with my Lindy's shakers, and this week I thought I will show you the same rainbow look but with distress inks. So I'm going to use Wilted Violet, Mermaid Lagoon, crushed olive, mustard seed, ripe persimmon and candied apple to create a little ink blended background with these rainbow colors, just making it even more fun for our interactive card. I always think that color plays such a huge role in deciding the theme of our card, and so by just making it colorful and vibrant, I think it just gives that happy vibe. So I begin with the purple, and I'm just using my mini blending brushes here, blending the ink, and I then go in with a little blue, and I first lay blue under the purple and then make sure that I blend it slightly, merging in with that purple, creating a little shade between the two colors there, and I repeat that same process with all the colors. So once I'm happy with the blending of the blue color, I go in with green, laying it first underneath the blue and then merging it there and creating a perfect blend of the two colors. And then I move on to yellow, doing the same process. I move on to orange and finally the red. And with this, I would like to say that take your time. There's no rush. Enjoy the blending process. You can go over the same colors as many times as you like. My tip here always is begin light, first lay a lighter color, and as you move along, you can always go back in and blend and add a little more color. So if you feel like the intensity is not enough for you, you can just go on and blend in more color. But at the start, if you've just laid down too much and you're not somebody who likes that bright, vibrant color, it's not difficult because these are distress inks, they are water reactive to lift up the color, and we'll actually be doing that after this ink blending is complete. But I just think beginning light always helps. So completing that ink blending, I am now going to spray water from my water mister, and after I spray water, I just leave that for a minute to let it react with the distress inks, and then use a paper napkin to blot that. And then you can see we have this white blotchy look from the splatter. Now, if you're going to be using distress oxides, you will have a very different look, even if you use the same colors, but it's still going to be stunning. Now, for the next step, I thought it would be a good idea to use one of the cupcake stamps, but just stamp that frosting, all of that yummy chocolate and candy and everything peeking through the cupcake, repeatedly using the same ink colors on the same area. And what this does is gives us a tone on tone look, creating a little pattern, and using this stamp that's actually meant for focal elements to create a repeated background pattern. So I've added both Wilted Violet and Mermaid Lagoon and stamped that right there at the bottom. And I am repeating the same process again, picking in Wilted Violet on one end of that frosting and Mermaid Lagoon on the other end, making sure there's no ink on the cupcake because I don't want that to come in my pattern, and then offsetting it, rotating it, and stamping it at an angle just to create that pattern. So I repeat that same process with all the colors, with the two blends in those areas, adding all those colors but with the same stamp and creating that gorgeous patterned look for our card front. So you could definitely use a pattern paper, you could use a stencil to further build on, but here I'm just showing you how to use the same inks and do this. Now for the fun interactive part. I am going to just bring out the two cupcakes, layer them on my card front, seeing how I want them. And once I know that I'm happy with the position, I'm just flipping over the card front, repeating the same composition with the cupcakes on the back of this, and pulling out my pencil to do a few markings. So we are creating a slider feature. We are going to create that on the right side of the card, where when something is pulled out, it reveals the sentiment. So for that reason, it's important for you to decide the focal point, place it in position, and make a little marking at least quarter inches inwards from the top and the bottom of the focal element. Now here, since I'm using cupcakes and this is not a fixed shape, it can get a little tricky, but it's not that hard. I am just using the base of the cupcakes as my reference point and making a little mark right there, and using the toppings of the cupcake as a reference point and making a little mark quarter inch inwards. Now this, you will notice here on this card, is not exactly in the center. But this works for me simply because one, it's a mini slimline card, the surface is quite narrow, and second, because we're using shaped focal points. But with that, I am now just going to cut two slits on the paper, not end to end. By that I mean leaving enough gap on both the left and right side, just cutting through the middle. So for some reason my camera stopped recording this part of me cutting those two lines to create the slits, but I am just going to show you how they look once that's done. So those are the two slit marks that I have, and you can see there's a good 3/4 inch from the left side and 3/4 inch from the right side that is not cut out. So it's just two slits right where we had decided and not end to end. Now to create movement, we are going to be using a piece of acetate as our arms or legs or whatever you might want to call it. And so I am cutting a piece of acetate about 3/4 of an inch, and lengthwise I have just left it, so I am using a scrap piece of acetate, but lengthwise it's almost about 4 inches. We will be trimming it off later, so that really doesn't matter, but it's important for it to be longer than our cupcake so that we have the arms or legs, like I told you, protruding out at the top and the bottom of our cupcakes. And now for a little watercolor play with distress inks. I have also added in ground espresso for my brown here. And I am using a watercolor brush pen and using my acrylic block as a palette. So when I generally work with one medium for a project, I like to use that medium throughout my project. And by that I mean, you saw how I used the distress inks to blend and create a background. I then used the same distress inks to stamp with a stamp to create a pattern. And I'm using the same distress inks to watercolor and color these focal cupcake elements. This is very easy, and I think it helps us stretch our supplies, and it also shows multiple ways of using one single medium. I have just smooshed some of that ink on my palette, and I'm using my watercolor brush pen and picking in color and laying that on my cupcakes, and just doing a loose watercoloring, going back in with more intense color to create a little shading, and coloring all these elements just like that with loose watercoloring, and bringing in all the colors we've used for our background onto the focal point as well. And I do this very slowly. I am not rushing this process. Again, it's something to enjoy, like we did with the ink blending. I think watercoloring is also equally therapeutic and relaxing. And that's the reason why I was talking about how I like to stamp multiple elements and keep them in my stash. And sometimes, even if I don't have an idea of, say, creating a card, I just like to color these elements, and I find that very therapeutic, and it then sparks my creativity and I have an idea for the entire card. So inspiration can begin from anywhere. Sometimes it begins from the background, sometimes it can begin from the focal point. And now you can see how just by adding all of that color and that shading, these cupcakes are coming to life looking so yum. Now to put it all together. So I've just laid out the two cupcakes, used a little washi tape to hold them both together the way I would like them on the card front. And I am going to be using a scrap piece of cardstock so that I can glue these two cupcakes together from the back. And that way they are not going to move and they just stay intact. But I want to create a little more depth and dimension, so I am using foam tape to adhere this scrap piece of cardstock at the back of these two cupcakes, and that is just going to give me a nice sturdy joint for the movement of my element. And now to attach that acetate piece, so I'm going to lay it down in a way that there is enough hanging out at the left and the right, or the top and the bottom of the cupcake element. And I'm gluing this to one end of my scrap cardstock that I've just adhered, and using some double-sided tape strips to hold this down in place. Now that way I have created the arms and the legs for this to be creating a functional slider element. So let's test that out. I am inserting one end at the bottom slit and the other end of the acetate at the top slit, so that both the acetate pieces come out at the back of the card, and moving and checking if this slide feature works well for the card, and and also just making a note of where I'd like the sentiment. So I've picked out a sentiment from the same stamp set, but I want to stamp this in two lines. So what I'm going to do is I am going to use a little tape and mask off a part of the stamp that I don't want to stamp yet, and just ink up the area that I want for the first line, and remove that tape and stamp that part, and repeat the same process by masking off the first part of the stamp and inking up just the second part and stamping right below this. That way I have used a single line sentiment stamp, but stamp that in two lines, which works perfectly well for this card, as with that slide feature I want the sentiment to peek through. I'm using the obsidian ink from Alt New because this just gives me a nice crisp stamping of the sentiment. And now I will insert the acetate like I did before with my cupcake elements at the top and the bottom, and slide it along, but first flip it, just leaving it on one end, turn around, and use thin strips of double-sided tape to make sure that all of this stays in place. Now just see how I'm placing the tape. It is inward, so I lift up the acetate flap, place the double-sided sticky part underneath that, and I have a white cardstock strip here about 1/3 of an inch in width and quite long because we'll trim it later, that I glue right over this to create that sliding element. So now I am going to just bring the cupcakes on this other end and trim off that white excess flap, just to leave a little portion where I can write pull to help the recipient understand that you're supposed to pull and slide through to see what's underneath that. Since I don't have any specific stamp, I'm just using my pen to write pull me on that white tab. And now to just assemble this together at the back. So it's very important that you cut off the acetate arms hanging out at the back of the card, just along that 1/3 inch of a cardstock strip that we have added. So once that's cut, everything is going to stay intact and the movement will be with that white cardstock piece. And we are going to use foam tape to create nice borders, just to make sure that the movement stays a little restricted. So right at the edge of that white cardstock movement piece, I am laying strips of foam tape, and I've added foam tape on the left end as well, and everything looks good. So I am just going to glue this entire card front now on my black card base, and you can see how the colors pop so beautifully on that black edge. Now what I also did was I just added a little ink blending with the same colors, the orange and the red, along that white tab we've created because it was too white. And I'm using my corner rounder here to just round the corners of that tab so that's completely in sync with the entire card and doesn't look too sharp just at that tab. Now I'm completing it off with white splatter, which I always feel enhances all the colors and brings everything together. And embellishing just the cupcakes, the frosting bit, with a few pearls to add a little element of bling and pop. Now, with all of that done, this card is complete, and I am very happy with the result, a colorful, vibrant, interactive card. And I'm just bringing it up close for you to see the details. We've created such a fun background and the slide feature, which helps the cupcakes move along one side of the card to reveal our sentiment, and then it can just be slid back into place and the cupcakes rest there on the center of the card. I really hope that this inspires you to create your own interactive card. Do give it a try and share in the comments how you were inspired by this tutorial. Until the next time, take care and bye bye.